In the intro, it said I had experience doing an off-grid home. That off-grid home has been in operation now for a few years, and since then, most of my project work is in off-grid residential in Mississippi right now. Um, that's not like most of the solar industry. In many states, you have solar arrays that do not have batteries, which is like installing half of the system. And that has some benefits because the grid is used as a battery. That also has some detriments because you need the buy-in from the grid and the grid policy in order for a system like that to happen. And solar, as it becomes more mainstream, it gets less, programized, less subsidized, less incentivized. And you might start seeing some costs being put back onto solar. And that might mean that you end up in a market where grid connected solar is no longer cost effective and you have to put on batteries. And what I like about off grid is you get out of that policy discussion. You get away from, what the incentives and subsidies are. Many of my off-grid projects, they're new construction. You might buy an acre of land and it's right on side the road and the power company will come out and put a new service in. So right now I'm working on a house right off the side of the road. The utilities coming in and digging a trench and doing underground wiring up to the house from the transformer. And it costs $450. They're like, well, we could do it for $300 if you want to dig the trench yourself. And it's like, no, $150 for, an 80-foot trench. Yeah, I'll take that. You can do that with your stuff. And many times you'll be in an electric cooperative or a regulated monopoly, and that's why you get that cheap grid interconnection, is because they're required by law to service every house in a territory. And so getting that service installed cheap goes along with it. But once you start moving away from the road, once you start getting beyond more than, say, 500 feet from the road, the power company is much more likely to charge you the real costs of doing the trenching and cabling. And these real costs can really start to add up. So like my first off-grid house, it was an $80,000 project. The power company was going to charge the client over $20,000 just to bring the power out to the property. And the guy said, I'd rather just spend that money on batteries and do my own thing. Recently I did a cabin in the middle of the woods, and the budget was $25,000. It was a smaller setup, but the utility interconnection would have been $16,000. And so, when you're building into the interior of the property, we're talking about like 500 feet or more, that cost of grid expansion alone can be the driver of your off-grid project. And it's a good one. Perhaps it's the best one. So I did some research on what does it cost per foot for overhead and underground wiring, and it's not cheap. It really depends on if you're using aluminum or copper. That's a big thing. Copper costs about 5 times as much per foot as aluminum cabling. So the cost of grid expansion can be a very, very big driver in going off grid. In fact, you might find a piece of choice property out in the wilderness if you really want to get away, and it's that lack of utilities on site that keeps the property value cheap. And so it's like the hippie retirement plan is to go and buy dirt cheap, pristine property out in the middle of nowhere and go off grid and stay off grid. But there's some other reasons to go off grid beyond just expansion. And it really has to do with how electric rates are trending. Where you go research the history of the electric grid, and right when the grid was first being built out, say in New York City, they didn't really know what the business model would be. And so would it be, oh, well, we'll give the electricity away for free and make money selling electric appliances? You know, we've kind of backed into this metered electrical rate, and the right to metered electricity has not really been firmly established. It's more that it's been assumed. I mean, the public service commissions, when they look at customers, they assume customers are unintelligent, particularly residential customers. You know, people don't understand electricity or how it works, and so we want simple rate structures. That's not necessarily the same thing as metered rate structures. So what we have pictured here are various rate structures where the meter fee by itself is over $50 a month. And so you might be, you know, these are like a mountaintop. You know, so you want to build that cabin in the middle of the woods, the power company says, we'll provide you with service, but it's going to be a $50 a month meter fee. RV parks, you know, you want to have service to that RV, and it's just going to sit there and not use very much electricity. You know, the meter fee is going to be $50, or like a seasonal rate. You know, you have an ice cabin on the Great Lakes in Minnesota, and you might just have service for a few months. You know, your meter fee goes up. You know, large homes, large services. You know, homes that have other electrical equipment, so they get more into commercial property. You know, three-phase rate structures. Yeah, I recently did a little bill analysis for a lead, and what he has is he has one commercial building that he's subdivided into 5 parts. And each one of those parts has a meter, and because they're all on electric heating, they're all on Mississippi Power's electric heating rate structure, and between the Gulf Coast recovery fee and the meter fee, he's paying about $70 a month per meter just in fixed fee charges. And one of his units is sitting vacant and not really using any electricity, and so he's still paying the $70. Another unit is a very low energy use, and so, you know, what happens is that fixed fee starts to become a high percentage of the bill. And that would still be true for an energy efficient building, or a building that just because of where it's located and the power companies, that's the only way around it. That's your rate structure. Or you don't use very much energy. Or maybe you're a solar customer, and so you use a lot of energy, but it's being offset by the solar array, and so that meter fee becomes a high percentage of the bill. And so I went and looked at not any of these like special rate structures that we just looked at, but If I'm a residential customer and I just want electric service from the power company, what is the highest just plain Jane meter fee, residential meter fee in the United States? I was surprised by the results. I was thinking it would be in California or New York City, places that have sky high electricity prices. But actually, you look at this list, it's in the middle of the United States. I guess Florida's an exception, but it's not what you would typically associate. I don't really think about Indiana as having high electricity prices, but what really stuck out is they're all co-ops. Co-ops get a little bit more wiggle room and freedom in setting their rate structures. And so they say, we operate the grid and we're going to have a rate structure that guarantees us enough revenue to operate the grid in these rural areas. And so rural areas, what is interesting is that they have very few customers per mile of power line. Out in Mississippi, the most rural cooperatives have less than 5 customers per mile of power line. And so the grid distribution costs are high. Now, these might be markets that have access to cheap electricity. Virginia may be getting cheap coal from West Virginia. Illinois and Indiana may be getting some cheap wind power. And so the energy charges may be low, but the distribution costs are still high. And so it might average out to an average rate structure, but those fixed fees are high. And while I don't really have a slide for this, where it effectively is going in the future is that a residential rate structure may be more like a cell phone contract, where it's, your bill is going to be $100 a month, but you have to stay within 11,000 kilowatt hours and 200 amps of service. And then if you go over that, your bill might go up to, 150, a month. Then you go more than that, you might go up to 200 a month. And you start paying block payments for blocks of energy, and it's no longer so directly associated with a one-to-one, 11 cents a kilowatt hour, 10 cents a kilowatt hour fee. And we already see that happening today because utilities have realized, hey, if I'm in a net metered state where I have to pay my customer retail value for their outflow solar electricity, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the metered rate of retail low, and I'm just going to jack up the fixed fees, and that way I can water down the revenue loss caused by net metering. And so what we see, or what I see, is a trend towards increasing fixed fees and keeping the metered rate stable. And that's kind of profound because a lot of solar customers or solar businesses will model a 2 to 3% escalator in electricity pricing. Some of the worst offenders I've seen, I've been out of state online sales companies modeling 7% a year, which is just not true. But even if your price of electricity is increasing 2 to 7% a year, that doesn't mean the metered rate is increasing. The metered rate could be flat, the fixed fees could be increasing, and you're not getting that value out of your solar array that you used to. So the utility has, more than one card to play in the net metering debate. Of course, in Mississippi, we don't have net metering. Actually, we passed a law that was a net metering law, and basically how it shook out was our net metering law was to say that we don't have net metering. It's the federal government does not regulate the state price of electricity. That is something that is left to the states. And if I had to spin it in a positive light, it would all come back to the fact that Mississippi is a rural state. We're full of rural electric cooperatives. Perhaps we're even worse off because we were actually first in something. We were the very first state in the country to have an electric cooperative. And so now in Mississippi, we have 34 different electric cooperatives. They're like small independent school districts. They might be more cost effective if there are only 4 or 5 cooperatives instead of 34, but historically, first out of the gate, and so we kind of got into these smaller cooperatives, and they simply do not have the customer basis to provide net metering like you would in a more heavily populated area, or at least that's what they claim. Now, there's a lot more to that debate that's really for another time and place. But the way it shakes out, when you don't have net metering, a lot of states are trying to roll back net metering, and even if you have net metering in your state, you may be on an electric cooperative that may not be required to provide net metering. And so your average retail value of electricity, average in the U.S. is around 12 cents a kilowatt hour. Actually in Mississippi, the way it plays out is out of that 12 cents, maybe only 9 cents per kilowatt hour is metered. And then the instant you outflow onto the grid, that electricity is bought back at 3 cents. And here's the thing, solar only works for 1/3 of the day. And so if you want to offset 100% of your electric bill, that inherently implies that 2/3 of your solar production is going to be outflow, and only 1/3 of that solar production is going to be used on site. So if I want to do 100% offset and solar only works for 1/3 of the day, then 2/3 of my solar output is going to go onto the grid. And so if you don't have net metering and that outflow is not worth retail but worth something much smaller than retail, that destroys the economics of grid-connected solar. And, yes, you could say that, okay, well, in summertime you have high electric use, and in wintertime you don't have as much outflow. In the springtime, you're going to be producing a ton of outflow because you don't have the heavy electric heating or electric cooling, and you have prime solar production. So, no matter how you do energy controls or whatever, you're still going to have this outflow issue if you don't have anywhere else to put the electricity. And so you could say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to add a battery and I'm going to store that electricity in the battery. But that doesn't really work very well either. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, it doesn't do anything about the fact that the power company could just increase the fixed fees and keep the metered rate low. So storing your energy in a battery doesn't really work. The other reason why the concept of day trading electricity with a battery bank doesn't work is that it costs money to run the battery. Batteries have an upfront cost. So you take that upfront cost and you divide by the total amount of kilowatt hours you get out of the battery, you get the total cost for using that battery over its useful life. And, it comes out to be, at the lowest, maybe 7 cents to 8 cents a kilowatt hour. You get into higher end lithium batteries, and it can go up to 15 to 16 to 17 cents, maybe even more per kilowatt hour. And so, if you have a time of day rate where you have a peak rate and you have an off peak rate, that difference between your peak and your off peak rate has to be greater than the cost to cycle the battery before you start making any money. And generally speaking, it's going to have to be twice the value so that you can get your payback within halfway through the battery life. Solar has a 25-year payback. Customers want to see a payback of, really under 10 years, but definitely under 12 and a half. So the concept of buying a battery to day trade electricity does not work very well because of the cost of batteries. And again, it's that low metered rate that gets in the way. Now, this slide doesn't really illustrate it, but where it gets confusing is that for commercial customers, it's completely different. Commercial customers do not have a kilowatt hour rate. Instead, commercial customers have a kilowatt rate. That's usually like $10 a kilowatt rather than 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And so commercial customers are not billed for the volume under the curve, the kilowatt hour, but instead commercial customers are billed by the kilowatt. Commercial customers are billed by the very peak amount of vertical demand, instantaneous demand. And so in commercial solar batteries, what you do is you take all of this surplus and you store it in a battery, and you only dispatch it a couple of days a month to shave off the very tip of your peak demand. And so it doesn't matter if your battery costs 20 cents or 30 cents a kilowatt hour to run, if you're saving $10 to $20 a kilowatt during that time frame. And so the intelligent commercial rate structure lends itself well for batteries and deployment, whereas with residential, we're stuck with these dumb rate structures that are itemized out by the kilowatt hour, and they just don't work very well for batteries either. Now, customers will still buy batteries and use them and cycle them, even if it actually ends up costing them a little bit more money than less, simply out of spite. They're only doing this because they get a raw deal from the power company, and so at that point they say, well, I just want to get rid of my electric bill. I'd rather pay upfront for the batteries and have them and use them and not have much of an electric bill, even though it might, not really pencil out. That's not a really fun market, though. You could solve this outflow problem by not doing a large solar array, just having something very small. But the problem is solar really wants a large project. When I have really good solar pricing. You have to in Mississippi to make it work. And the way I get good pricing on my solar panels is to buy by the pallet. And so when I do solar projects, my customers do not get custom designs that perfectly fit on their rooftop. Now, aesthetics are very important to me, but when we're talking about pricing and system sizing, I usually give my customers like, okay, well, here's one pallet, here's two pallets, and here's three pallets, and one pallet is 7 kilowatts. So I recently just turned on a 15 kilowatt solar array, and it turned out to be 2 pallets of solar panels. So I'm often doing 1 pallet or 2 pallets and sometimes 3 pallets in my design work to keep the costs down. Now, if I don't do 1 pallet, if I don't do 7 kilowatts, if instead I go and do a half a pallet and I do, say, 3 kilowatts, by the time you get up on the rooftop, it doesn't take that much more time to install 10 more solar panels or 12 more solar panels. And so, but at the same time, there is a minimum amount of money that I need to make off a project for it to be worth my time. And so, essentially, when you start getting into system sizes that are less than 1 pallet, your installation pricing starts to really kick up a notch. And you can't have that high installation pricing and get a good payback, yet at the same time, the larger your project is, the more outflow you're going to have, and that can get you into diminishing returns on the other end too, depending on what your grid policy is. So kind of what I'm talking about here is that there are economies of scale to say, look, you could get this SolarEdge is a leading inverter company. You can get a 3 kilowatt SolarEdge inverter for $1,000, or you can get over 3 times as much. You can get 3.3 times as much power for 2.4 times as much cost. And so, you really want to get into larger inverters, more panels, in order to drive down that dollar per watt installation price. So here we're looking at, say, forget batteries for a moment. You might get a quote for a 5 kilowatt array for $4 a watt, and you might get a quote for a 20 kilowatt array at $2 a watt. 5 kilowatts at $4 a watt is a $20,000 project. 20 kilowatts at $2 a watt is a $40,000 project. But you're spending twice as much and getting 4 times the amount of power. So what I'm saying is solar does like economies of scale and larger projects, but then you get more into that outflow issue. It's hard to design around. Now, kind of getting back to what we were talking about with that commercial unit where they had 5 units and some of the units really weren't using any electricity, but they still had a big fixed fee. Mississippi likes to say, oh, we're right in the national average in terms of electricity pricing. And then you get into different rate structures. Do you have a progressive rate structure where the more electricity you buy, the higher your rate goes? Do you have a regressive rate structure, which means the less electricity you buy, the higher your rate goes? Even if you have a flat electric rate structure where there's no tiers for heavy usage or discounts for heavy usage, it's just all flat. Once you get into these high fixed fees, the rate structures become regressive in the sense that, okay, let's say I'm a large house in Mississippi and I'm using 2,000 kilowatt hours of electricity a month. So I'm really cranking the AC. I might have electric heating. I might have 2 hot water tanks. I might have a hot tub. I don't know. 2,000 kilowatt hours a month at 12 cents a kilowatt hour. I'm looking at $20 a month for my fixed fee and $240 a month for my metered rate. My total bill comes out to $260, and I go and divide by 2,000 kilowatt hours. I get to 13 cents a kilowatt hour effectively. And what I just wanted to illustrate is that if you're a typical home, you're not using 2,000 kilowatt hours a month. Let's say you're using 1,000 kilowatt hours a month. You still pay that fixed fee, less on your metered rate, and all of a sudden your rate jumps up. If you're only using 500 kilowatt hours a month, and there's really 2 types of homes that do this. One are homes that don't use very much electricity. Now, I had a solar customer where the fixed income residents, retirees, they didn't really turn on their air conditioner until they went to sleep. They had a window unit and they only air conditioned their bedroom space. So grandma and grandpa on a fixed income who really sip their electricity, they pay that fixed fee, but their energy rate is so low that they're paying 16 cents a kilowatt hour effectively, way more than per kilowatt hour than what the heavier user would pay for. And that is also what solar does, because you might be using 2,000 kilowatt hours a month, but maybe 1,500 is coming from your solar array and 500 is left over, and all of a sudden you're paying a higher rate per kilowatt hour for what you do use from the grid. And really the only way to get rid of that is to get rid of the fixed fees, which means you have to get rid of the meter entirely. And, connecting to the grid can be kind of a hassle. There's interconnection processes, and with that, there may be additional fees put onto it. So, like in Mississippi, they charge you for the digital meter that they put on your home for solar, and that actually lets them not give you net metering, whereas the old school analog meters would inherently have net metering. And I've adjusted for this in my practice by, like on this project I'm just now doing, I have a solar array on a home. Here's my house. And here's the grid. And what I have is a battery in between the grid and the home. And so I stick an inverter with a little bit of an input charger, but it's a one-way inverter. It does not flow out to the grid like most inverters. It's just one way. And so it is not interconnected to the grid. So we don't have the interconnection applications. We don't have the additional fees for solar stuff. And even so, Mississippi Power has gone to say, if your renewable generator is connected to your electrical wiring system, then we'll consider it connected to our grid, even if it is physically separated. Well, if you're powering your light bulbs with solar, Mississippi Power is going to say, you're on our grid, even if the output of the inverter does not ever touch anything that is served by the power company. That'll all make more sense a little bit later on, probably tomorrow, when we start really looking at spec sheets. This is a problem that is not going to get better. It's a problem that's going to get worse. When there's not a lot of people doing solar, all right, we can have these friendly grid policies that aren't controversial. But when we're talking about a 50% solar grid, the existing stakeholders who already have their infrastructure in place, they don't want to have to just go under and go bankrupt because they have all these loans to pay off their existing power plants, which are now being rendered obsolete. So they're not going to be very friendly towards solar unless they're forced to by law. And generally, the existing stakeholders inherently are more involved with lawmaking than the new kids on the block. And so let's just take the Tennessee Valley Authority, which the irony here is that the TVA was established to bring electricity out to the most rural areas of the U.S., and solar is point of use generation. But they've actually come out and said, they're going to punish solar owners in the name of fairness because they don't want to shift higher costs onto those who don't have solar. And so the TVA will go and write utility scale contracts for solar at a higher rate than what they'll buy back the same electricity from point of use from their own customers. And then they'll go and add or give their cooperatives the ability to add solar discriminatory fees that are monthly on top of that. And, they say it in page 1 of their executive summary for their 2018, rate change report. So, they even though they're far behind on consumer-owned solar, they say their current programs over-incentivize consumer installation, even though those programs are so unpopular they never get fully subscribed anymore, leading to uneconomic results, yada yada. It's politics. And so here's the worst offender in my neck of the woods, where you do a grid-tied solar array and they add $15 a month to the bill, and then by law, there's a federal law that says you have to allow solar to interconnect to the grid, and you have to buy back that power at avoided cost. Which is what is the cost that you were going to go and buy the raw material for your power plant at, less an administrative fee. That is the price that you have to buy backfed clean power at. So in Mississippi, that rate is around 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour, less an administrative fee, plus the solar discriminatory fee of $15 a month. You go and do the math. You look at what solar produces on an annual basis. You look at the buyback rate minus the wheeling charge. You look at the added $15 a month charge, and it gets to the point that on Coastal Electric, you have to install 4 kilowatts of solar. That ranges between $8,000 to $12,000 of solar just to overcome the added cost of the monthly meter fee, because all of this stuff on top is going to be outflow onto the grid, being bought back at pennies a kilowatt hour. So it's it's a shame because Coastal Electric is on the coast, and so a hurricane comes through and wipes the grid out, and now you don't have people, generating power at the point of use, and it's a whole blown, health and safety disaster. But that's how the policy shakes out. And that brings us to the next kind of argument about solar and off-grid, which comes to reliability. Solar is often attacked for being unreliable, and that is not a good label for it. Solar can be intermittent, which means, on a partly cloudy day, it's going to jump up and down. But we all know that the sun rises every single day reliably. I started thinking, well, how can I argue that solar is reliable? What I know is when my off-grid customers go through a tornado and it takes the grid out, they still have power. Hurricane Katrina in parts of Mississippi took the grid out in certain parts for over a month in the rural areas. If I have solar batteries on site, that is way more reliable than grid power, and yet at the Public Service Commission level, solar is being attacked for being unreliable. And yet it's way more reliable to generate and store your own electricity on site than it is to rely upon the electric grid for that electricity, because the electric grid, especially our electric grid, which is a radial grid, so power gets pushed all the way out to spokes, that can all go down at once. So, we generally know that underground wiring is more reliable than overhead. And I put some graphs on here to kind of illustrate how, depending on your definition of power loss, because the thing is, like, when you have an outage related to underground wiring, it can last as long as outages related to overhead, because underground wiring can be sometimes more complicated to fix than overhead. So we got the customer versus system here. When you look at system-wide, so when the customer loses power because of a power outage, it's going to take the power company some time to fix it, regardless of if the place is served by overhead or underground. You look at system-wide transmission and distribution, and underground fails far less frequently than overhead. And so without getting too far into these graphs, what we know is underground wiring goes out less often than overhead wiring, and so it's accepted that overhead wiring is less reliable than underground. It's also cheaper. And so, there's that debate between cost effectiveness and reliability to consider. Solar on your rooftop going to a battery bank in your basement does not have any power lines going into your house, underground or overhead, and so it's not subject to going out when there's a grid failure. And so if you accept that underground wiring is is more reliable than overhead wiring, then an off-grid solar array should be considered more reliable than either of those two previous options. And so the idea that solar is unreliable is simply not true. A well-designed off-grid solar array should not lose power. If you're losing power, you undersized it. You know, a well-designed off-grid solar array should have some double redundancy built into it so that if one aspect of the project, of the system fails, it doesn't take your whole system offline. But you nail your design and it's more reliable than the grid, because the grid can go out due to weather, particularly in rural areas. It goes out more frequently when you start getting outside the city. Okay. The next question to consider is, well, can't I just keep my grid connection and have some batteries too? And we talked about how with rate structuring, it's not that simple. We're going to get more into that when we do some actual calculations, but you know, the point on that, the fact of the matter is, you know, lithium-ion batteries, which are very popular, are costing around 15 cents a kilowatt hour to use. So, you know, you take the Tesla Powerwall, and a Tesla Powerwall, you know, costs about $10,000 installed. And that $10,000 Tesla Powerwall installed, and that's being generous on the installation pricing. It's warranted for 37,800 kilowatt hours, and that's 26 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, well, even if you factor in the 30% tax credit, that's still 18 cents a kilowatt hour. And so for energy arbitrage, if you have a time of use rate structure, all the utility has to do is keep that time of use rate differential less than 18 cents a kilowatt hour, and day trading electricity with your lithium-ion battery bank all of a sudden is not the value that you think it is. You know, if you buy the battery, you might as well use it, but you're not going to come out ahead. Okay, well, what if I lose power? You know, I still want to power my house during the power outage. I mean, I think about New Jersey had a really good solar program, or still does. So Hurricane Sandy hits and it wipes out the electric grid, and all of a sudden all these solar owners lose power because the grid is out. And there's a safety provision built into your grid-connected generators that says, okay, if the grid goes out, the generator needs to turn off because they don't want you backfeeding the grid when they're trying to fix it and electrocuting someone. And so the way around that, you know, and then there's a couple of other things. We talked about this in our electric code class, but you know, your generator needs to be sized to power the load of what it's trying to power. You know, if your home needs 200 amp service, you're not allowed to run it with a 40 amp generator. You know, it's not sized appropriately. The customer will run into issues, power issues. So similarly, what these grid-connected battery inverters do is they'll turn off the output of the inverter and keep a dedicated panel active. And so they'll take a dedicated critical load panel. Now, the thing about that is you're not using the entire inverter. So this is a SolarEdge inverter, and it's a 7.6 kilowatt inverter, but its critical load panel is only rated for 2 kilowatts, not 7.6. And so what that means is it is not powerful enough to run your central air conditioning in an off-grid mode. It can only keep your refrigerator and deep freeze running. And I'm telling you, maybe that will work fine in the north half of the U.S., but down here in Mississippi, if there's one thing that people want to stay on, we'll throw a barbecue with everything we got in our fridge, but don't take away our air conditioning. We need that. And so that's kind of the problem with your grid-tied inverters, even when they do have battery options, is they still have to turn off that grid-tied component, and so they've opted for a transfer switch inside the inverter that will only feed a critical load panel to a very small amount. Now, there's other ways these inverters are used. So in the commercial setting, this very same inverter will only turn on when your load goes above a certain amount. And at that point, it'll still provide 7.6 kilowatts of power out of the battery. And so, if you're doing grid-tied applications of battery management, you can still draw the full inverter capacity out. It's only when you go off-grid does it switch on to these little critical load panels, which are kind of wimpy. And so that concept of, I want to power my whole house during a blackout because I have solar, you might not get there even when you buy a solar battery inverter that is grid connected. It's confusing, but what that means is you don't really have full house, whole house backup power when you opt for your standard solar battery grid connected solutions. They're all based around only providing backup power to critical loads, not the whole house. All right, well, how do we circumvent that? How do we trick our little rinky-dink critical load panel and reroute it so instead of powering just this rinky-dink light bulbs and stuff, how do we run it so that it can power the service panel on the side of our house and provide whole house power so that I can run my air conditioner and not a single thing else. Well, at that point, you could consider a transfer switch. We're going to flesh this concept out further throughout the program, but this is called a generator interlock switch. And here's the thing. This is your main breaker, and here's where the generator is tied in, and it's fixed in place so that only the main breaker can be on and the generator interlock switch, the generator switch is off. Or you see there's like little slots in this plate here. You can raise the plate up, but it'll only raise up if the main breaker is off and the generator switch is on. So the concept is, well, why not take that critical load panel and instead of landing it on a critical load panel, go and land it on the generator interlock switch breaker so that during a power outage, you can go and flick the manual interlock switch, turn your breaker on, and now feed your whole house, albeit with less power. You're still going to have to stay within the design threshold. Well, the answer is, well, the inverter companies don't want you to do that. That's not how they, what they want is you to have automatic load backup within the parameters of the system and not do anything else but that. But what we'll expand upon is the concept that maybe, there are ways to go beyond what the manufacturer is telling you can do with the system while still being within the definitions of National Electric Code and safety. And so the grid-tied battery inverters on the market are lithium-ion with SolarEdge or lithium-ion with Enphase, and that gets you into only having a limited amount of power and using the most expensive battery, because these are not lead-acid battery inverters. And so you only have a small battery for a small load. There is one inverter on the market that's interesting. SMA makes a critical load panel that comes off the side of the inverter that'll power an outlet that you can plug into during the day without batteries and still get power coming out of it. It's kind of interesting. Some installers think it's a gimmick. And then the other thing is, you look at the cost difference between the SolarEdge battery inverter and the SolarEdge standard inverter that doesn't have any batteries, and it's quite a step up. We're talking about 25 to 30% more. We're talking about over $1,000 more to upgrade to that battery inverter that you can only use a small amount of during a blackout. So what we were just saying is that these grid-tied battery inverters use lithium-ion batteries, and lithium-ion batteries are different than lead-acid batteries. And the difference is lead-acid batteries are typically low voltage and high amps, whereas lithium-ion batteries are high voltage and low amperage. And even if it's all the same, because a volt times an amp is a watt, and really no matter how the battery is configured, you want watts out of the inverter. What it means is it's not cross-compatible, where, it's either a high voltage lithium-ion battery inverter or it's a low voltage battery inverter that's more akin to lead acid. If I'm going for maximum theoretical efficiency, it's better to operate at high voltage and lower amperage than low voltage and high amperage. If anything, it just makes your cabling a little bit more cost effective, because the cross-sectional area of your cable has more to do with amperage than voltage. And so if you can drop the amperage, you can have a smaller cable size. And so high voltage and low amperage means smaller cable size, and so that has a edge in cost effectiveness. Now the problem is the most cost effective batteries on the market today are still lead acid, and we'll talk about this, but it's not the lead acid that you will find when you go look up lead acid solar batteries, ironically. You know, the most cost-effective lead acid batteries on the market are forklift batteries. And forklift batteries are very high amperage and lower voltage. And so if you want to use a cost-effective battery and the batteries are the most expensive system component, they're not compatible with many of the popular grid-tied battery inverters that are, ignoring lead acid because they say, you know what, lithium ion is close to becoming the main battery technology. It's not today, but it will be. And so we're just going to rally around lithium ion. And also, our customer base is going for high end. They're in higher priced energy markets. And so lithium ion is our solution. There's less stuff to worry about in terms of maintenance with lithium ion. So, they all go around lithium ion. But here in Mississippi, we're all about cost effectiveness, and we just can't get there with lithium ion at this time. We want to go and use forklift batteries, and they're not compatible with many grid-tied battery inverters. And so, grid-tied batteries are used to lower your electric bill. And that can be very beneficial for a commercial business, but commercial businesses are billed differently than residential customers, and what is good for the business is not available to residential customers. So grid-tied batteries are not great for lowering your bill if you're a residential customer. They're also not very good at supplying backup power. Generally, they only protect small critical load panels. Power companies don't want you to compete with them, and so they will work against you to make sure that you don't become the competition. And that's just something we'll have to deal with forever. So the grid is not as reliable as a well-designed off-grid array. The grid loses power. A well-designed off-grid array should not lose power. The main thing that the grid gets that you don't get is long-term financing for off-grid systems, although it's not unavailable. I mean, solar installers now have access to 20-year unconventional financing. I personally think that if there's a monopoly where there's only one entity providing power to the customers, then they should be giving those customers better solar policy than a deregulated market where there's competition. I mean, what is sad about Mississippi today is that down the road in Houston, Texas, they have a deregulated grid, and there's no Texas net metering law, and yet customers just through open market competition get better deals for grid-connected solar than what customers do in Mississippi, where we have regulated monopolies that presumably get their monopolies to protect the economic, health, and safety interests of their customers, but are now delivering less economic, less reliable power while alienating customers who want to do something about it. And so what you might find yourself in is a situation where, yes, going off grid is expensive. Paying your electric bill every month for your entire life is also expensive. That doesn't necessarily mean that if you have the money, paying for an off-grid solar array is not necessarily uneconomic. And in fact, there are markets in the U.S. where it can be more economic than staying grid tied, particularly when you factor in the cost of grid expansion. But sometimes when you're just located where you currently are at and you're just facing really bad solar policy. Okay. Now transition more into some design discussion. Often you'll get a customer request and they will not have the 15-minute by 15-minute or 30-minute by 30-minute electrical data that digital meters are supposed to be providing their customers. So in Mississippi, half the grid is on digital meters, and yet the customers do not have access to that time interval data. What I usually get is data only becomes available if you go and request it from the power company. So what you're starting with is your month-by-month electric bill. So how do you design a solar array with a month-by-month electric bill? Now, one thing is it's good to understand your electric load. And this, I think, is a very big misconception, because you start getting into homes now that have, because of electric code requires you to have so many power outlets per every few feet of wall space. I mean, there's supposed to be an electrical outlet or 2 or 3 on every wall in your house. And, depending on the way that the electrician wired it up, that could mean you have dozens and dozens of electrical outlet breakers on your service panel. And then you have an electrical outlet for your stove, and it's a heavy one, but how often do you use your stove at 450 degrees while using all 5 burners on top? So your stove may be on a 60 amp breaker. You're just cooking dinner. You might be using 4 or 5 amps. Your same thing. What you have to remember is your breakers on your service panels are sized for the maximum continuous output capacity of the device and then some. And so you count up all the breakers on your service panel, you start to run out of space on that panel, then you need to get another panel, and now you have 2 200 amp panels, and you may start thinking, oh man, do I need to have 400 amp service on my home? Generally speaking, homes that have high electric bills do not have high power draw. The one exception is tankless water heaters. So tankless water heaters are often 15 to 20 kilowatts. And so your typical home with air conditioning and electrical usage and all that built in, may be drawing 6 to 8 kilowatts of power every 15 minutes. And then that tankless water heater clicks on and you're way off the chart. And then it clicks off again. And so that's kind of interesting that tankless water heaters, they're pitched as being energy efficient because you're only heating the water that you're using, and you're doing it very rapidly and very fast. But what it's doing is it's going to spike your load up and then drop it back down. And that spike in your electric load is not good for solar, because this application right here is, the graph says 4 kilowatts. That's probably in the springtime, and this is summertime, and we get up to less than 8 kilowatts. And so if I put it all on a 12 kilowatt inverter, I have plenty of headroom for all the power, the instantaneous demand, the vertical axis on these charts. I have plenty of headroom in my power, except if I use a tankless water heater. And so what is actually better for off-grid is for your load profile. So what your electric load looks like throughout the day is called a load profile. It's a lot better for your load profile to be a short, long rectangle rather than a tall, skinny rectangle. So spiky electric loads are bad. It would be much better to have a tankless water heater, not a tankless. It would be much better to have 2 tanks of water heaters that are operating continuously throughout the day than a tankless water heater that spikes, because you're going to have to buy all of that inverter capacity just for that little short instance, and there's a better option that can exist within your system parameters. What we're doing on this off-grid house that's currently under construction is we have 2 hot water tanks, and they're on intelligent switches. And so we only have 12 kilowatts of inverter capacity coming out of our inverter. So once the home demand hits 11 kilowatts, the tankless water heaters turn off until the load drops back down, and then the tankless water heaters turn back on again. So we're using load management. We'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. But back to the basics, we're getting back to, with off-grid design, trying to identify how they're using their electricity. I am not a fan of saying, okay, well, you're going to live off-grid, so have gas heat instead of electric. I think that's kind of cheating, because you might just be trading one cost for another. At the same time, you have to manage your electricity, so it would be much better to have an electric heater on low throughout the entire day than an electric heater on high for just 1 hour. Other elements of energy efficiency and thermal mass and all of that comes into play here. But really what you want to do is get a good survey of all of the electrical devices in the home. Some regions, wood chip heating is a good way to go. What I like to think of is, maybe you have a non-electrical heating source, but then if you manage your electricity, you can complement it with electric heat when you have the power available, so that even if you're on gas heat, you may have electric heat as well, and use the electric heat on sunny days when your batteries are topped off, and really have that gas heat there as a backup. But so how are you doing your home heating? How are you doing your water heating? What is your air conditioner load going to be like? Are you going to be trying to charge up any electric vehicles? Are there any unusual heavy loads that you haven't thought about? And what these charts are here is basically, this is a design software called Aurora Solar. And what they've done is they've taken your month by month electric bills and your device survey and made an assumption about what your load profile will look like. Because, your people do use heat in a regular fashion. People do use air conditioning in a regular pattern. And electric use does increase for residential customers throughout the day. And, so we already know what air conditioner loads look like. We already know what heating loads look like. And so they're making some assumptions about, your maximum power draw based on how much energy you use per month and what's inside your house. So here's your month by month consumption. And what we generally see in electric bills are that in the springtime and in the fall, your electric use is at its lowest. And then it's a kind of a trade-off between, are you going to see the most energy use in the summertime or the most electric use in the wintertime? And that will depend a lot on if you're on electric heat or not. And so if you are on a net metering plan without batteries, you're more concerned about how much electricity you're using a year, and you design the system to do 100% of your annual electricity. And off-grid, generally speaking, solar, you're going to produce a lot of energy in the summer when days are longer, and less energy in the wintertime when days are shorter. So typically what you're going to look at is not what size do I need to offset 100%, but instead, what size do I need to offset my wintertime electric bills. And so to produce 17,000 kilowatt hours of electricity a year, that might be a 12.5 kilowatt solar array. And if I wanted to well size the system for off-grid, what I would say is that, well, in the wintertime, the system's not going to produce enough power. And so I might go and look at, say, an 18 kilowatt array so that I know I have all the power I need on the most critical months. And then what that also means is the rest of the year, I'm going to have a ton of surplus. Summertime, I'm doing okay. And so that does mean that in an off-grid setting, you're going to have larger solar than if you were grid connected. But really nowadays, the solar panel is not the most expensive component. The inverters are more expensive than the solar panels at times. And definitely the battery is a higher cost than the solar panel. So adding, a few more solar panels onto your project is not going to bust your budget. And there's fun stuff you can do with a surplus of electricity. There's Bitcoin mining, which is converting electricity into money at the very least. Now, I like the idea of incorporating it into your smart home and your landscape architecture, where maybe you have some aesthetic features like water fountains that only work when your battery is in a healthy state of charge, So you're using that surplus electricity to make your home more beautiful and providing you some visual cues that tell you that, hey, you have a lot of electricity right now, so don't worry about how you use it. And when those water fountains aren't working, you kind of hunker down a little bit more. I also like to look at this chart and think about it in the sense that when you're living off grid, aside from what you see on like HGTV, off grid living and stuff like that, you're not living in energy poverty. Most of the time you're living in energy overabundance. Maybe you have to manage your electricity, but certainly, in off-grid living, you might have twice as many refrigerators with half of the space filled in with geothermal storage. I mean, and that way they can run during the day and kind of coast at night. You might have to be a little bit smarter about how you manage your electricity, but there's going to be, many times throughout the year, especially in the spring and in the fall, where you're going to have all the energy you could possibly want because the system is sized around winter. And so again, that gets you into, say, economies of scale where, adding a few more panels is really not going to break the bank. We kind of talked about this already. Another very good design question is, well, how many days in a row am I going to go without solar production? And what this slide is illustrating is that there is a big difference between an overcast day and an overcast day. So on lightly overcast days, you can still get good production out of your array. It's only when you get big, thick clouds that your production kind of drops off. How do you determine that? How do you determine your weather? Well, that's what our design software, PV Watts, is very useful for. We talk about PV Watts in other classes. It's a very easy to use performance estimating tool. We'll do an example, but basically it tells you how much per year a solar array will produce and also breaks it out on a month-by-month basis. But what many installers forget is that you can download the PV Watts data on an hourly basis. And so in off-grid design, what I do is I go and I download this data on an hour-by-hour basis, and it gets you into a chart that it's literally January 1st at midnight, January 1st at 1 a.m., January 1st at 2 a.m., all the way down throughout the entire year. You get an hour-by-hour breakout. And it's simple. There's other solar softwares out there that are even free, that aren't commercial softwares. Generally, the commercial softwares are easier to use, but PV Watts, it's more like a data set or a building block that the commercial softwares plug into. You're using the same weather data regardless of if it's PV Watts or somewhere else. And what PV Watts is basing this on is actual recorded weather data, and it'll separate beam irradiance from diffuse irradiance. And so here's a day where we have a lot of beam irradiance and not much diffuse irradiance. This is on January 1st. And here's January 9th, where we have almost no beam irradiance. We actually have a little bit more diffuse irradiance than we did on the previous day. Now, this is a sunny day, maybe a little bit of mist or humidity or, very thin cloud. And then here's a day where, that's like the previous picture. The storm clouds have rolled in. And what we can see is for this 1,000-watt array on this clear day, we're getting a lot of energy. And on this 1,000-watt array on this overcast day, we're only getting a trickle. We're getting 300 watts instead of 660 at the best time of the day when the clouds have cleared a little bit. But for most of the day, we're getting 40 watts instead of 600. And so what I'll do with PV watts, this is just what we just talked about. So, one thing to keep in mind is that lightly overcast days will produce, not what it will on a sunny day, but still a large amount of power. Maybe not enough to recharge the battery bank, but enough to offset you for the day. So an overcast day, a sunny day might produce 2 days worth of energy for you. An overcast day might produce 1 day's worth of energy for you. And then a very overcast day won't produce any energy at all. And so you can chart it. You can take the PV watts data and chart it, and you can actually count, hey, I'm going to go through 1, 2, 3, 4 days where I don't get very much sun before I go through 4 days of sunny weather, and then I go through 2 days of not sunny weather, and then 3 days of sunny weather. You can use PV watts to determine how many days in a row you go without the sun. And then, another point is, well, hey, sometimes increasing your array size is going to be cheaper than increasing your battery bank size. And so, there is an optimization point where you want to consider the cost of increasing the array versus the cost of increasing the batteries. We'll show you how to do that. And this is the last point before we take our break. It kind of ironically gets you into an issue where does efficiency matter in off-grid design? Because, and the reason why I say that is that in an off-grid design, during days of full sun, you're going to fill your battery bank all the way up. And if you double your array size so that even on an overcast day you're still topping up off your battery, then you're really going to overkill it and just have tons of what's called stranded energy, which is energy that you're producing but you're not consuming, and there's nothing there to do with it. And so that's where, maybe having a bunch of water tanks and storing hot water, or, running the air conditioner on full blast and chilling the concrete inside your home. So like things like thermal mass become very important. But at the same time, all of this extra electricity is exactly what it is. It's in the middle of the day, you got a bunch of surplus electricity that you're not doing anything with. And so maybe the efficiency of the system, things like voltage drop, the loss involved with charging and discharging your battery are not as important of issues as the industry might place on them, because the point is a well-designed off-grid rig should have plenty of electricity, and so losing 1% because of voltage drop or 5% because of the battery charging and discharging cycle is not really a deal breaker.
All right, so welcome back. I think I had the wrong microphone on GoToWebinar selected, so I think the audio quality the second half of this program will be a little bit better. I think it was also recirculating the audio when Andrew was giving his intro, so I think that was a mic error on my end. Anyway, we were talking about how you can start out with the PV watts hourly data, download it, and this is going to give you an hourly output for your solar array. It'll also tell you the irradiance, the solar irradiance or solar insolation data, how much energy is in the air. And so we were using that to analyze weather data. And what you do is you take your Excel sheet and you have your array size and your battery bank size and your home consumption data, which if you don't know what that is, I mean, at the very least, you have your month by month data that you can divide by the days in the month and then the hours in the day to kind of average it out. So to start getting together what this commercial software picture does, this is a software called Energy Toolbase. It's really not anything you can't do just in a spreadsheet formula. Where here they're plotting the battery state of charge in this red line throughout the cycle. And then here they have the PV watts solar data. It shows you how much sunshine there is on a day-to-day basis. And so what we can see is that the more productive the day is, the higher our battery bank state of charge climbs. And then what we see in yellow is the battery charging or discharging. And so what we see is that on truly sunny days, on our grand slam sunny days, that's charging the battery bank all the way back up to the top. And of course, you can have a generator there to mitigate risk during overcast weather. I'm going to talk more about generators later. What I have learned in my region in Mississippi is that we only have like 2 critical weather cycles per year on average, generally occurring after winter solstice. So this is I look at the month of January very closely. And then as we get into spring and summer, you don't need to worry as much. So the question is, how large of a battery do you need? Well, for one, I would, and this is going to depend on the climate, because, certain parts of the north part of the United States, you just will not have very sunny winters. But if you're living off grid, my opinion is that you should not rely on a generator, that the generator should only be a purely backup role. And so if that means that you live so far north that you have to consider wood chip heat or gas heat instead of solar heat to reduce the size of your battery bank, so be it. But generally speaking, residential generators are a very expensive way to generate electricity. We're talking about 20 cents a kilowatt hour up to 40 cents a kilowatt hour. And so just planning something so simple as, oh well, in January I'm going to run off the generator and then the rest of the year I'll be fine. You'll be trading an electric bill for a gas bill, potentially without any cost savings at all, if that's your mentality. So, generators have gotten to be really inexpensive for what you get nowadays, but I mean, that doesn't mean that the gas isn't costly. So my opinion is that your battery and your solar array need to be large enough to get you through the winter. Now, that doesn't mean, there might, if you actually actively manage your energy and realize, oh, it's that 1 week of winter where I'm going to go into low energy mode, and you adjust your energy use accordingly, you'll go a lot further. Another consideration if you're up north to think about is snow on the rooftop. We don't really have to deal with snow in Mississippi. I don't think that there's a lot of thought given in building design on how to melt snow off of rooftops. Generally, you don't want to melt the snow because then you get ice, which is worse than snow on your rooftop. But just some thoughts I've had are things like maybe putting an hot air vent underneath the solar array, so that when it does snow, you can run some hot air under it and melt all the snow off. And generally, if you're going to have snow sitting on top of the array for over a week, you're going to want to take some kind of active measure, whether it's brooming the snow off, going with a ground mount, not putting it way up on the second story, or consider some way, electrical heat tape even, because the energy that you use to melt the snow off will be far less than what you'll lose by having snow sitting on top of that array for an extended period of time. So what we're going to do is you want to run a PV Watts model and then pick an array so that every single month the production is greater than your consumption. And so here we've picked for this electric bill, an 18 kilowatt array where every single month we're more than what we need. Because we have to remember, this is not a month-by-month issue. This is a day-by-day issue. So what we've done is guaranteed ourselves that at the end of the month, our batteries are going to be full. But then we're also going to need to go back a step and make sure that every day, our batteries are going to have some juice in them. But this is just our starting point. And then if you only have that month-by-month electrical data, just convert it into hourly averages. Now, what we're thinking back on those spiky loads versus, lower, flat, continuous loads, this is what you're getting when you do daily averages versus reality. At the same time, this is going to model a lot more nighttime energy use. And if these heavier loads occur in the middle of the day, when your solar array is on, you're going to be using less of your battery than what modeling the average load would be, which is going to give you more electricity use at night. So I kind of feel like taking your monthly average and converting it into an hourly average is kind of splitting the middle. Because if you live off grid, you're going to want to do what you can to have less spiky loads and more usage of energy in the middle of the day. And that might mean that instead of having one deep freeze, you have two deep freezes. It's not about energy poverty, it's about load shifting. So if you have two deep freezes and you fill the bottom half of both deep freezes with jugs of vegetable oil, then that could just be frozen in the middle of the day and then coast at night. That's cheap load shifting. Less power demand on your battery. Doing laundry in the middle of the day. If you work from home, doing more cooking in the middle of the day. All that stuff can really get you that much more efficient and further. We haven't talked about discharge rates yet. That's coming, but a load that is constant throughout the day is analogous to a battery being discharged over 20 or 24 hours. A spiky load that's only on for 15 minutes is analogous to the battery being discharged over 15 minutes, and not even lithium ion batteries are designed to be fully discharged over 15 minutes. And that is why tankless water heaters are so bad for off-grid living, is they really exceed the discharge capabilities of the batteries, on top of requiring a heck of a lot of power that you have to pay for output capacity. So if we go with our hourly averages and then do load shifting, our model is going to be conservative. We're going to avoid these tankless water heaters, and furthermore, if the client moves in and they're not doing anything to adjust their energy use, they can improve upon their energy usage habits and have a little bit of headroom built into the system, rather than starting off the bat with assuming all these improvements are going to be made. What's interesting about batteries is they degrade as you use them. And so, unlike certain aspects of solar where you oversize and you just lose it, you produce too much power and you just lose it, you buy too much inverter output capacity and you never use it, so you lose it. With a battery, if you buy too much, it'll last longer, and so you're going to get it back. And so here we've taken the month-by-month electric bills, broken it out by days in the month, and that gives us an average amount of kilowatt hours per day, and that gives us an average kilowatt load per hour. Then we take our spreadsheet with PV watts, and so PV watts gives us our system output in terms of production, and then right next to it we add our hourly consumption. And then we add a column for our battery bank size. And so if we take our system, our battery bank size, so in this model, we're just guessing. We start with a guess. So we're guessing our battery bank needs to be 120 kilowatt hours. Now, what we're looking at here is that we're using 48 kilowatt hours a day or 56 kilowatt hours a day in the wintertime. And so a 120 kilowatt hour battery bank is going to give us, over 2 days without any kind of sunshine, not just overcast days, but super overcast days. We're going to have some storage. But we don't actually know how that meets up in our model quite yet. So maybe you start out by just guessing you need 2 days worth of storage. We're guessing a little bit more than that. And so if we know at midnight our system isn't doing anything and we're consuming 2 kilowatts of power for 1 hour, our battery bank is going to drop from 120 kilowatt hours down to 118. And same thing with the next hour and 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 the next hour until the solar array starts to wake up. Here's at 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. What I do with PV Watts is I always do PV Watts as a 1 kilowatt solar output, because then I'll have a scalar. So in addition to my battery bank size, I'll also have an array size, and then I'll take my 1 kilowatt output and multiply it by my actual array size to get my PV array output. And so what you can see here is that 8, 9, 10, the solar array is going to be able to turn on. And so now instead of losing energy, we're gaining energy back. And then once, the only other thing you have to really consider is that once you hit your maximum capacity for your battery bank size, you have to go and write your Excel formula. So I use a bunch of, if statements. And it's like, well, if the amount of power going into the battery bank is going to exceed the size of the battery bank, then go ahead and just keep it at my starting size. Otherwise, if it's going to subtract from the battery bank size, just keep going. And so now in my Excel sheet, I have a column that toggles based off my array size, and then my battery level, whose starting capacity and maximum capacity is based off a cell value. And then I get into another one, which is what is the minimum battery level. And so for this point, I'm just assuming that my battery is infinite with an upper limit of 120 kilowatt hours, but a negative limit of negative energy, which doesn't exist in the scope of this class, at least. And so what we see is that if I have an 18 kilowatt array and a 120 kilowatt hour battery bank, based on the consumption data and subtracting it from, and adding my array data and subtracting my consumption data, I get to a minimum battery level of negative 241 kilowatt hours. Well, so then I start playing around with it. I get into if I do a 22 kilowatt array and a 90 kilowatt hour battery bank, I get a negative 122 kilowatt hour battery bank, which is better than negative 240, even though my battery bank size is actually smaller. And so at that point, I play around with it more. I go and I look at I have a 22 kilowatt array. That's 3 pallets of modules. What would it be if I did 28 kilowatts? What would it be if I did, this is, I think, down a size. I think this should have been 14 here. And so what I can see is that when I'm going from 3 pallets of modules down to 2 pallets of modules, I look at these two numbers and there's a gross difference. When I go from 3 pallets of modules up to 4 pallets of modules, I go from negative 122 to negative 94. And that's not so much of a difference. It's not like the difference between 122 and 758. It's much closer. And so I'm starting to get into diminishing returns the larger my array size goes, and then I might have to face the bitter truth that this deficit is occurring on days without sun, and so I need to increase the size of my battery bank. And so then, look, I fixed the number in this slide. So then instead of doing a 90 kilowatt hour battery bank, I do a 122 kilowatt hour battery bank. And what I can see is by increasing my battery bank size by 30 kilowatt hours or 32 kilowatt hours, my minimum battery level goes up to negative 62 instead of negative 94. The other thing that I see is that if I have a 22 kilowatt array and I increase my battery bank size to 122, my minimum level is it goes up by 30 as well. And so what we know we've ruled out is that the 15 kilowatt array size is too small, and that once I get to this point, increasing my battery bank is giving me kind of a 1-to-1 relationship. At that point, when you're honing in on your optimal size, it's really good to graph it. So in the past we were graphing the days without sun. Now we're graphing this column that represents our battery bank level. Because what we want to do is make sure that we don't have negative energy in our battery bank, that our system never runs out of energy. And so graphing that, so here we have reflected in our graph those days when we get into negative energy. Graphing it gives us a better understanding of what's going on with our system. And so here we are on January 1st, and we're in some sunny weather. And so we have in this case, it's a 90 kilowatt hour battery bank. And look, on these sunny days, our 90 kilowatt hour battery bank is doing just fine. It's getting, one day of sun is getting us all the way back up to the top. But then, after this day of sun, we go through, 1, 2, 3, and into, on our fourth day, we rise back up. But what we realize is this 4 days of cloudy weather have drained our battery bank. And to be fair, we look at this little period of solar generation, and if we went and we doubled our array size, or increased our array size by 50% by adding on another pallet, it's still not going to get us to where we need to be. And so at that point, what we're essentially saying is that we're going to need to either increase our battery bank size by that much, or not for the entire month, but for this 4-day time frame, we need to run the generator. So either we need more batteries, or we need to run a generator during this 4-day cycle. Because if we ran a generator during this 4-day cycle, let's say we go 1-2 days without our generator, but into this 2.5 day, we're like, oh, well, that's too low. Let's charge us all the way back up to the top. We run our generator at that point. Well, then we're going to be back up at the top here, and this is a big day of sun. We're going to be way up at the top here, and we're going to be way up at the top here, and so we're back into operating at the top of our range. And then this time, we don't need to run the generator because we recover in time. At this point, we don't need to run the generator because we recover in time. And then on this day right here, well, we need to run the generator to get us back up to the top. And so what we're seeing here is that on this day and on this day, we need to run our generator. And so we're only running a generator, in January and February, we're only cranking it twice over that time frame. We're not running it every single day. The generator is there purely to play a backup role. What for most of our cloudy weather cycles that are 2.5 days in duration, the overcast days do help out. It's just the very not overcast days that damage us. And the generator plays a pure backup role. Now, what I'll even do is take my Excel file and add an additional column, which is the generator runtime. How long is my generator running? What is its fuel efficiency? What is its fuel type? What is the cost of that fuel? Because then I actually have a cost that I could compare to the added cost of increasing my battery bank by 40 kilowatt hours. So if I'm going to use, $500 of fuel a year, then I might want to go and buy $4,000 more batteries and simulate that and see what that does. March and April, nothing to worry about. Summertime, I'm way up at the top. This is 0. So summertime, I'm just slamming my battery back up to the top. There's plenty of headroom in there for an electric vehicle. Maybe on those winter blizzards, I call in and work from home. Here we're getting into October and November, and maybe this is a late October hurricane. We get 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of 5 days of stormy weather. Not much production. Well, again, I would be turning the generator on at this point and charging it back up to the top, and then it would be draining down again by this much. And so I might have to run the generator, 2 days in a row on that one. I run the generator, if I run the generator here, because I've drained all the way down and my generator charges it all up to the front top, well, then the sunny weather kicks in. And, if I had just added a little bit more capacity to my battery bank, I could avoid running the generator at that time. But on the next cycle, it doesn't do me any good. I have to run the generator. And so by graphing it and visualizing it, you can start to talk to your weather pattern and be like, okay, well, that's a generator runtime, but that might not be if I just increase the size, but that's a generator runtime. And you start developing a narrative on what's going on. What we're already seeing is that going from a 22 kilowatt array to a 28 kilowatt array really isn't going to help us out any, because our array is slamming us back up to the top. It's just, what do we do when we get into this weather cycle? And that can only be solved with increasing your battery size or running your generator. I run my generator here, and I still have this vector to overcome. So even if I get all the way back up to the top, it's going to come down. I'm going to have to run my generator again, and it's going to get to the top. But then once I get out of this, if I get to this point right here, instead of recovering the battery, all of this would essentially look like that, because it would be squished up at the top of the battery range. And so there's program, you have a voltage being read off the battery bank, and then the inverter will start up a generator when the voltage drops to a certain threshold. And so here I have my generator column, and this is simulating a 15 kilowatt generator being run for an hour and putting juice back into the system, and being run for another hour and putting juice back in, and run for another hour and putting juice back in. And so what I see here is I'm running a 15 kilowatt generator at full capacity for 1, 2, 3 hours. So you can start putting a cost associated with that, and that keeps me from avoiding my minimum battery deficit, is the solar array, the battery level, and the generator. And so I have to do a little bit more cost analysis to see if a 90 kilowatt hour battery bank with a generator is fine, or if I can substantially reduce my generator runtime by further increasing the size of my battery bank. Let's get into a discussion of battery selection. Let's just go ahead and dive in. Batteries have a lot of different numbers on their specification sheets. It took me a long time to start being able to technically analyze one battery from another. Because it's like, okay, well, let's just take dollar per kilowatt hour. Well, there's how much the battery can store, and then how many cycles it can have. And so, there's a dollar per kilowatt hour of storage, and then there's also a dollar per kilowatt hour, total. The total amount of power that's come through that battery, that's your levelized cost of cycling the battery over its useful life. Whereas you're typically looking at, okay, it's a 48 kilowatt hour battery and it costs $4,800, and so it's costing me $100 a kilowatt hour. That's generally how you're going to kind of break out the cost when you're looking at it on paper. There's also the total storage capacity. And this is where my friends in the lithium ion industry, I think, overlook something, because they look at, say, a lead acid battery, and they say, okay, well, with lithium ion, you can fully discharge it and then charge it back up again, and there's very little degradation. I mean, they don't last forever, but what we would call a battery that you can discharge all the way down and charge back up again, and there's very similar performance all the way through that cycle. That would be an elastic battery, like a rubber band that you can just pull and stretch over and over and over and over again. Lead acid is less elastic than lithium ion. You charge it all the way down and charge it back up again in this lower range, it's going to have worse performance. Another way to put it is that if you discharge a lead acid battery very quickly, it's going to lose a lot of efficiency compared to discharging an equivalently sized lithium ion battery very quickly. It's not the full picture, because I'm not trying to say that you can't deep discharge a lead acid battery. The answer is you can. It depends on what kind of lead acid battery you select. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But so a common argument that lithium ion battery proponents will say is that I would rather do a smaller lithium ion battery and discharge it more deeply than a larger lead acid battery that I'm only wanting to use it in the top of its range. And what I think they overlook is the fact that for most of the time when you're living off grid, if you're using a lead acid battery that has 2 or 3 days of storage capacity inside of it, you're only using it at the top of its range. It's very rare for you to get down into the middle of its range, and only a few times a year are you going to get down into the bottom of its range, at which point you turn a generator on and charge it back up again. Whereas if I had a smaller battery, so instead of this being my zero line, if this were my zero line, because I have a smaller battery instead of a larger battery, I would have to be cranking that generator on all the time with a smaller battery. And the cost of gas is expensive too. And so I would not discount the total storage capacity of the battery bank and saying, okay, if I have the choice between a 120 kilowatt hour battery and a 90 kilowatt hour battery, ignoring the battery technology, that 120 kilowatt hour battery is larger than the 90 kilowatt hour battery. Just basic stuff. The 120 is larger than 90. And when you live off grid, there are going to be times when you need that 120, when you need that extra storage capacity. You may have to manage your energy and draw it out more slowly rather than quickly, but size matters. Maybe when you're grid tied, you could have a lithium ion battery for lowering your electric bill that's jumping up and down, whatever, because it's so small, it doesn't have much capacity. So every day you're draining it and charging it back up again, and draining it and charging it back up again. Maybe that's fine. With off grid, you're going to need a large battery, and cost may be what drives you away from lithium ion at this time. And of course, with a larger battery, you avoid your generator use. You have more peace of mind. When I was building my very first off grid house, we were talking about battery bank sizing, and I was saying, you probably don't need 120 kilowatts. You could probably get away with 90 and just run the generator a little bit more. And the client's response was, I understand that, but if I'm hearing that generator run, I'm thinking I'm about to run out of electricity. And I'm not trying to go off grid for more stress in my life. I'd rather just pay the grid connection. So, I want a system that is stress free. I don't want to have to listen to my generator run all the time. Well, that's kind of a interesting outlook, I thought. Okay. One thing about battery spec sheets you get into are these like C20, C10, C5 or C6 rates. I'm like, well, what is that? What does that mean? Well, C20 is the battery capacity over a 20-hour time frame. And so solar being on for, let's just call it 5 hours a day. It is a little bit longer than that. Let's just call it 5 hours. That would be charging the battery at a C5 rate. A home that is on 24/7, if it had a perfectly flat load profile, it would be discharging at a technically C24, but convention, they will label it at a C20 rate. If you were to do a load that discharged the battery in 30 minutes, that would be a 2C rate as opposed to a C2 rate. So they just kind of move it over to the other side when you start getting into fractions. So, there are high-end lithium-ion batteries that are designed to be discharged over a 15-minute time frame called lithium NMC that we get into in our commercial solar peaker class, because that's all about reducing your 15 minutes of maximum demand. And so you need a battery that you can just discharge insanely fast. That's not the Tesla Powerwall. That's way high-end lithium ion, not low-end lithium ion. You could get hung up on, well, what's my efficiency loss at between C5 and C10 versus C20? But we got to remember that the charging efficiency isn't going to matter very much, because most of the time you're going to hit your peak storage capacity and then have some stranded energy left over. So that stranded energy is going to be burnt off before it even gets there as your charging efficiency, but that really doesn't matter as much. You want to fully charge up your battery every day, so you're going to have surplus, and so the charging efficiency, that's kind of, they say don't sweat the small stuff. Don't worry too much about the charging efficiency. Similarly on the discharge efficiency, most of the time you're going to have, a day and a half worth of storage left in the tank. And so the discharge efficiency at that leg of it is not going to be critically important. And at the very worst case scenario, you still have the generator there playing free safety. Maintenance is a consideration. We're going to talk about that later. There's some temperature considerations, but I've been very pro lead acid for temperature considerations, and some lithium ion guys are beginning to make me see it more as an even playing field. You're going to want to do temperature regulation for your batteries anyway. Maybe not extreme temperature regulation, but you want to keep them below 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And you want to keep them above freezing as a rule of thumb. And that's not too difficult to do. We're going to talk about some things you can do with that later. But as we saw earlier, the Tesla Powerwall 2, 10 grand, 37,800 kilowatt hours under warranty. Even when you factor in the 30% tax credit, costs about 17.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Forklift batteries are cheaper. They cost about, the one that I use new costs slightly under $200 a kilowatt hour, but then there's actually, that includes shipping. $200 a kilowatt hour, and it's rated for 3,000 cycles at 80%. So we can only use 80% of its capacity, and it's rated for 3,000 cycles. And then that gets you down to, and this isn't the whole story, but actually it's even cheaper than what I was modeling here. I must have been modeling it off 2,100 cycles, because with the tax credit, that gets down to about 6 cents a kilowatt hour. So, we'll do these calculations later, but, let's just assume you didn't competitively bid out your stuff and you got your 12 cent a kilowatt hour industrial FLA. What you have to look out for is when you're doing your kilowatt hour capacity of your FLA, well, at what C rate is that? Because what we'll find is that the curve of industrial FLA is much steeper than the curve of an elastic battery like the Tesla Powerwall. And so what that means is at a C20, where I'm discharging this industrial FLA over a 20-hour time frame, it may only be costing me 12 cents a kilowatt hour, but that very same battery, if I discharged it over 2 hours instead of 20 hours, I would generate so much heat loss that my cost would go up. And so I think that is what is kind of confusing to people, is that right now, within the battery realm, if you are looking for a very quick battery, lithium ion is more cost effective. But if you are looking for a battery that you want to live 24/7 off of, lead acid, when used for base load, when used over a 20-hour cycle or 24-hour cycle, lead acid is not only going to cost less money up front, but the cost per cycle is going to be cheaper. But if you were to use that very same lead acid like a very bouncy lithium ion, if you were going to use it for commercial demand management, it would not be as cost effective. Well, we're not trying to discharge our battery over 1 or 2 hours. We're trying to discharge our battery throughout the entire day. With being smart about what appliances we're selecting, having tank water heaters, having extra tank water heaters so that we can slowly heat the water throughout the day and not rapidly heat the water over a short period of time. Having twice as many refrigerators and have them on low with thermal mass inside the refrigerators so that they're always running on low. Using load control so that heavier loads in your house, turn off. This gets more into smart home stuff, but on the house we're currently building, we're putting energy monitors into the house that communicate with her thermostat. And so when the home load surges, the thermostats dial up, and so they don't run the air conditioning as hard momentarily. And then when the home load comes back down, we get the set points of the thermostats back down to where they, what's more comfortable for the client. All right. What I have learned about lead acid is that there is a huge range of lead acid going all the way from golf cart batteries, little small 2-volt batteries you can just kind of pick up and they weigh about 10 pounds, all the way up to industrial forklift batteries that you have to get special lift equipment just to get them out of the truck because the lift gate is rated for 3,000 pounds and the battery weighs 3,600. It just so happens that in a lot of residential new construction, you already have this heavy lift equipment. And that can be a strategy on which kind of lead acid you get. If you have heavy duty lift equipment already on site, forklift batteries are the way to go. If you don't have it on site, then you might get, I still call them forklift batteries because they're made by a forklift battery manufacturer, but instead of being in a 48-volt package, they're in a 12-volt package, which reduces the weight. I made a mistake on my first project. I ordered these 800-pound 12-volt forklift batteries, but they all came on the same pallet. And so we still had to get the special lift equipment to get the pallet off the truck because the lift gate was only rated for 3,000 pounds and we had 4 800-pound batteries plus the weight of the pallet. It was too heavy to use the lift gate. Getting it shipped on 2 pallets would have saved me the cost of that rental equipment, although you still have to move it around. Weight is a sign of quality. Maybe lithium ion weight versus lead acid weight is not a good comparison, different chemistries. But lead acid weight to lead acid weight is a good comparison. And so I just wanted to show you that like this battery right here is not considered a forklift battery. It's not considered what is literally called an industrial lead acid battery. And so this non-industrial lead acid battery would be, it might be marketed as a marina battery or a renewable battery or a premium battery, but it is not an industrial battery. And the industrial batteries weigh per kilowatt hour, a good 50% more. And that weight has to do with its anode and its internal packaging, and that has to do with how long they last and what their performance is. And so, the performance of a mid-range lead acid compared to a top shelf lead acid, it's a night and day difference in terms of performance. I never really appreciated that until I started dissecting the spec sheets. So here's some lift equipment. The client on the project actually bought a little crane. This is a hydraulic battery operated one. He got a kind of a manual one. He uses it to move other heavy stuff like his safe around. I kind of want to get into spec sheets, but here's some transportation kind of things people do. You take these 800-pound 12-volt batteries, and here's an installer lifting them with his ladder and a hoist or a winch. Use the battery power to lift itself. These batteries on the left are sealed. That's why they can tump over on their sides like that. I generally do not go for sealed lead acid. I will always go for unsealed lead acid because it's cheaper. And, there's reasons to go with sealed lead acid. But in my opinion, if you're going with a sealed battery, you might as well just go for lithium ion at this point. That'll make more sense when we talk about maintenance in a minute. So, this has actually changed in the latest edition of National Electric Code. People were getting a little too... And in fact, with modern batteries, you're going to probably be fusing all ends anyway, so you're probably going to have a floating battery bank. All right, so let's take a look. Here's our battery bank. Here's our battery inverter. And one thing you want to look at is, well, how many, on my battery inverter, how many terminals do I have? Because if I have one circuit of batteries, they're going to land on one circuit. If I have two circuits of batteries, they're going to land on the other circuit. Now, the battery inverter that I use right now just has one terminal and not two. And so if we had two circuits of batteries, we had to go and have a sub panel and build a bus bar so that we can land two circuits of batteries on there. So like small stuff like that can trip you up. But really, you're going to have to build a bus bar anyway, because you're not just connecting the battery to the inverter. You also have the solar array to hook up to. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. It's real important to have your cable links be the same size in a battery. If you have two circuits of batteries, circuit 1 and circuit 2, and these cable links are of different sizes, you will draw more out of the longer battery than out of the shorter battery. And we have to remember that the inverter is, outputting 120, 240. And the battery bank may be down at 48 volts. And what that means is to get from 48 volts up to even 120, you're looking at 2.5 times as much voltage. A volt times an amp is a watt. And so if you're pulling 1 watt of power out of the battery bank through the inverter and you're stepping the voltage up 2.5 times, or then the amperage is going to be similarly impacted 2.5 times. So, a volt times an amp is a watt. So what we're doing is if we're on one side doing volts times amps and we're up at 120 volts, and then we're on the other side and we're down at 48 volts, our amperage on the battery side is going to be way high compared to the inverter output, where it's going to be low. And so that's kind of where the downside of these lower voltage battery banks is, that they are high amperage battery banks. And so things like your wire sizing, drawing 400 amps through a cable that's twice as long, it's going to generate more heat, more resistance. And what that means is this battery is going to degrade at a different rate than the other. That's going to put more resistance into the equation where there's already resistance imbalance. That's going to cause this battery to degrade even faster and faster and faster. And so you want to keep, all of your battery cable lengths kind of the same size. And it's not recommended to have more than 2 battery banks tied into one inverter. And in fact, kind of the best practice would just to have 1 battery bank, because then you don't have to worry about the resistance mismatch between the 2 banks of batteries. And so here's a product line of lead acid, and there's a very real, these are 12 volt batteries. And so let's say we went with a 48 volt battery bank. Well, you're wiring them in series, and series wiring amperage is the same, and parallel wiring amperage adds up. And so we wire in series to get up to 48 volts. And so what we're looking at is down here on the low end of the product selection, we could get this 845 amp battery. We could get 4 of them in series at 12 volts each, and that would give us 40 kilowatt hours. Or instead of doing the 845 amp battery, we could go all the way up to the high end of the series, 1690 amp hours. And we get 81 kilowatt hours. And so we could, if we only, in our last design example, we needed 122 kilowatt hours. Or being more conservative with more generator use, 90 kilowatt hours. And so even if we went with a 48 volt battery bank with their most heavy hitting battery, we couldn't squeeze it out of one circuit. And so what we're really looking for, let's say we went with the 122 configuration, we'd be looking for 122 kilowatt hours divided by 48 volts. We divide that by 2, divide it between 2 battery banks. We'll be looking for a battery bank that has about 1,270 amp hours. So, right on the money right here. Still not done with spec sheets yet. Let's talk about maintenance for a minute. There's two things you need to do with lead acid batteries, and namely unsealed lead acid. Unsealed batteries will emit gas, and some of the gas is explosive, so you have to vent it to the outside. The explosive gas is very lightweight, so it'll kind of waft upwards, so you just need to capture it and vent it to the outside, make sure there aren't any, ceilings or chambers where the gas can accumulate. Most of that gas is water vapor, so you're going to need to put water back into it. And so when you look at a lead acid battery, it has these little holes in it with a cap. You take the cap out and you put water into it. And so you can get little watering cap accessories that do two things. One, they connect all the holes together, so you only have to put in your water at one point and not have to deal with every single individual cell. The other thing they do is they stop the water level at the right point so that you don't overfill the batteries. That water, when you're subjecting the battery to a charge, it's going to rise in volume a little bit. So if you fill your battery water level all the way up to the top, then you'll get, and then you go and charge your batteries vigorously, you can overfill the battery and then it'll spill the electrolyte onto the floor, which is not the best thing in the world. That electrolyte helps the battery conduct electricity, so you don't just want to spill it and lose it. And so the watering accessories, basically what happens is you look into that hole, and then down in that hole there's a plate, and you just want to fill the water level to be kind of right above that plate. And so you do get a good 1.5 inches or so of kind of empty space. There's various ways you can do it. You can do it with a gravity feed. Here's a water tank that it's kind of like a super soaker. You crank a little tube and it pressurizes the tank. And you connect the nozzle in and fill your batteries. Or you can even automate it and get it into a more automated system. Watering the battery doesn't take any time at all, though. I mean, it's like watering your plants. It's not a difficult thing to do. You got to use distilled water. So this thing on the right is a filter to filter tap water to take all the minerals out of it. So the one maintenance task, which is the most important task, is to water your batteries, and you're supposed to do it every 2 weeks. Now, what I have found with solar, there's a forklift battery, you're discharging all the way down and then recharging and then discharging all the way down and then recharging, whereas a solar array, you're usually just up in the top range. So you're not using, the solar home does not use the battery as vigorously as a forklift. And so your forklift watering schedules, which are like weekly, you don't get anywhere near that. So in the springtime and the fall, you may only need to have to water your batteries once every month. And then in the wintertime under heavy use, you may need to water your batteries more like once every 2 weeks, check it every week. So there's the water level, and then there's measuring the the specific gravity of the water inside the battery. I say water, it's really electrolyte. The reason why that's important is your battery bank voltage, it kind of looks like a mountaintop followed by a plateau followed by a cliff. And this is where you're fully charged. This is where you're using the battery. And this is where you're discharged. And so gauging the state of charge of the battery by just measuring voltage is not a very good way to do it. So instead, you measure the specific gravity to indicate the state of charge. It's much more exact than this kind of voltage curve. And so the hydrometer is used to track the healthiness of each battery cell. And so they say you're supposed to do the hydrometer reading every time you water the battery. That's a little overkill. And the reason why I say that is that the hydrometers don't fit through the watering caps. And so if you install your watering system, you go and you water your battery and it all fills up, well, then you have to take these caps out and stick in with the hydrometer, and and that takes, a little bit of time. It's still a very easy thing to do. But basically, from talking with my battery distributor, he's told me that I only need to do the hydrometer readings about 4 times a year when I'm using them as solar batteries. Because again, it's not like a forklift battery where you're vigorously discharging it every single day. If you are discharging your battery every single day, then, you'll need to water your battery every 2 weeks. And it would be the best practice to do the hydrometer reading at that same time. But, it's quick. It's not unplugging these caps and sticking it in. I know it sounds a little like, oh, it's chemicals and I don't understand electricity or batteries, or oil changes. So, this is not something I want to do. This maintenance task is easy and quick. And the reason why you want to go with an unsealed battery, because here's the thing. A sealed battery does not produce gas. A sealed battery does not produce water vapor. You do not need, nor is it possible, to add water to a sealed battery. You do not need, nor is it possible, to do the hydrometer readings of a sealed battery. So sealed batteries are starting to sound really good, right? Well, the first thing that's wrong with them is they cost more, and it's a very real cost issue. The second thing that's wrong with a sealed battery is the gas can't escape. The water vapor can't escape. And you produce that gas and that water vapor when you're charging the battery. And what that means is that a sealed battery, you have to not charge it as aggressive as an unsealed battery. And the way a battery degrades, it's like barnacles. When you use the battery, there's a chemical reaction between the anode that sticks down into the electrolyte, the plate, and the electrolyte itself, the water. And that anode gets covered up by barnacles. And once it gets fully covered up, it can't conduct electricity anymore. So the anode's fine, the electrolyte's fine. It's just the barnacles between the anode electrolyte interface that get in the way. And so with an unsealed battery, you can supercharge it and burst those barnacles off of the anode by applying high voltage. It's not something you do all the time, but I recently had a client. He was playing around with his settings. He reset it to the factory settings without realizing it, wiped out everything I had programmed. At the same time, he wasn't using it as a weekend cabin, but he's in a daily construction schedule, and he had relatives come in with their RV and plug into the system who are living off of the system 24/7. And so what was a system that was designed to be used 2 out of 7 days was now being used vigorously 7 days a week under settings that were not designed for his project, and he fully drained his battery down. Well, now the battery won't charge all the way back up again. Because it's a unsealed battery, we can apply this high voltage equalization charge to it and resurrect the battery, burst those barnacles off, and keep going. If it were a sealed battery, it would be ruined. So that mantra of you can only discharge a lead acid by 30 or 40%. If you fully discharge a lead acid, it won't charge back up again. That's not really true, but it's more true for sealed batteries than unsealed. And so that's where I'm saying if I'm getting a sealed battery, I'm going with lithium ion at this point in time. If I'm doing an unsealed battery, I would even consider a used forklift battery because they're cheap. And that can get you your off-grid project within the budget that you can afford, and it buys you 8 to 9 years for the cost of lithium ion to drop, and then you just upgrade at that time. A lot of people can't wait 8 or 9 years for the cost of lithium ion to drop. They got to do their off-grid project now. So getting a getting the unsealed lead acid is where it's at, in my opinion. It is you can kind of I want to refrain from saying you can damage the battery because you're not supposed to, but they are a good starting battery where the customer can fully drain it without wrecking it, and it's at a good price point, and it's at something you could actually consider getting reused or refurbished to lower the price point further. The main problem with lead acid is not the maintenance. The maintenance is very easy. If the client is not paying that $20 a month meter fee, they might be inclined to pay for a maintenance plan so they don't have to mess with it. 2/3 of my clients right out of the gate prefer to maintain their own batteries because they see how simple it is. And so generally I'll sell them a maintenance plan for a year or so and then use that as training, and at that point they'll take it over from there. The main problem with lead acid is weight. It's heavy, and that makes it difficult to manage on site, and that could easily disqualify it from some sites. Now, I work out in the country. There's a lot of heavy equipment around. If I was in the middle of the city, it might the site logistics may drive whether or not you can actually use a heavy battery. So like a refurbished forklift battery, it weighs 3,600 pounds. So you need to have heavy duty lift equipment for that. Lithium ion pricing, it still needs to drop. It is dropping, but it still needs to drop further. One kind of issue going on with lithium ion is, the cheap, good lithium ion is going to the electric vehicle industry. So, the Tesla buys their lithium ion for $130 a kilowatt hour. By the time it makes it into the Tesla power wall with all the bells and whistles, you're paying over $600 a kilowatt hour for it. And so it's just cheap lithium ion for residential buildings in small quantities. It's not available at this time. So either we'll need to have a hiccup in the electrical vehicle industry, or I imagine that to be kind of similar for some time, because the industry reports say lithium ion has fallen 30% in the past year, but the price of the Tesla Powerwall hasn't fallen 30% in the last year. And whenever I price out lithium ion with my solar distributors, it's really looks like it's at the point where I need to take a risk by buying like lithium ion batteries from unknown manufacturers in China in order to get it closer to what the industry reports say it should cost, which I'm not willing to do at this time. I know there's lots of hobbyists out there who are going with repurposed lithium ion. The problem is National Electric Code requires you to use batteries listed for purpose on battery banks that are over like 60 volts. And so you technically you're not allowed to use a electric vehicle lithium ion battery in a off-grid application, although not to say that people don't, it just is something you can't really offer as a service. Let's see. Just kind of moving on. I'm going to stop in a couple of minutes so you can take your quiz. I'll go over the quiz questions that we haven't gotten to yet so you don't tear your hair out when you take it. The quiz is no big deal, by the way. Just it's more to show that you've been around and completed the course. The grade is not so important. So this is kind of interesting. Over on the right is a Schneider product, and I like it. It has its flaws, but this is like a 6.8 kilowatt inverter, and it costs about $3,400. Battery inverters cost more; they do more things. So here we have two of them double stacked, and then we have Schneider's service panel, which costs about $1,100. And so this total rig here cost for the two inverters and service panel $8,000 total. And actually there's some bells and whistles that aren't even included in this, like a voltage logger and a generator auto start that might push that a little bit further. Whereas here is an inverter. This is actually an Australian inverter. I use a Chinese inverter called Ames. This is an Australian inverter called Victron. But the principle is kind of the same. This Schneider inverter is rated for grid connection. And so it has the 5-minute restart safety provisions and all that allow it to backfeed onto the grid. This kind of all-in-one unit, it has a transfer switch inside of it so that it can take the grid input or the generator input, but it is not capable of backfeeding the grid. It's only one way. It only goes into the load. And it can switch between the grid and the battery power. So if the batteries are low, it can switch over to grid power and recharge the batteries and bypass and feed power into the load. And then when the batteries get full again, the switch changes and now the grid is no longer going into it and you're running off your batteries again. But it's all one way. Whereas the Schneider system is two ways. You can backfeed into the grid, and then you can come into the grid and commingle all of your electricity. The Schneider system is stackable. You can put two inverters right next to each other and double the power. You need more than that. You got 3 inverters right next to you. You can triple the power, 4 inverters, all the way up to a commercial system. These all-in-ones are generally not stackable. That stackability comes with bidirectionality. The non-bidirectionalness of the all-in-one units also usually comes with not being able to stack. But then again, this one for 12 kilowatts cost about $3,000, whereas this one costs about $8,000. And so I think that is important to note, is that if you stay within, I really misspoke on this slide. These inverters are listed. They're just not listed for grid connection. And your local jurisdiction may bug out when they hear that. It's like, how are you doing solar and the grid is coming into it, but it's not interconnected to the grid? What it is the output is not interconnected. This is not a parallel inverter. If anything, it would be a series inverter. It's one way. And you stick to that product line and you can save a substantial amount of money compared to something that is more grid friendly and grid interactive. And just the price range between $3,000 and $8,000 is enough to get a very large refurbished flooded lead acid battery. And so it's like, by the time you get into this Schneider system, which is not the cheaper SolarEdge battery inverter, but is the full-blown battery inverter where you can use the full capacity, well, even that's not true, because what you still have to do is, up in here, they have a transfer switch, so when the grid goes out, you're only powering a critical load and not all of the loads anyway. Now, what I would do is not have any kind of grid panel here and put it all on the critical load panel, but, whatever. The point is, you can save a lot of money by going into kind of lesser known inverters that are not listed for grid connection. And so even on these all-in-one inverters, you get a lot of landing terminals that can have you avoid wiring disconnect switches and transfer switches. And that's where it becomes really not AHJ friendly, because they like to see the transfer switches being external to the unit. You may have to end up buying 2. What we're doing on our current project is installing a manual transfer switch that will switch between the solar array, the off, and the grid only. And that is driven by a fear that our 12 kilowatt inverter may not be enough when this client with their lake house has over all of the family for the holidays. So here's the house, and only 2 people live in this house. The array is well sized for 2, but when they have their family of 12 come over, they switch over to only grid connected, and that allows them to use their full service panel rating, the full 50 kilowatts that can flow through your 200 amp service. Okay, let me scroll through the quiz questions real quick and then just tell you the answers to the ones that that we haven't covered yet. So just pay attention to this, and then we'll hand it back over. Lead acid discharge rates are logarithmic. We kind of talked about that. Question number 3, which of these is least similar in function? The answer is the DC inverter, DC charge controller, or DC inverter, AC charge controller. We didn't get into MC cable, but the question is which is not a disadvantage, and it's D. NEC requires DC wiring to be inside of metal. That's an advantage of MC cable. It stands for metal clad. We'll talk about that tomorrow. The battery layout question, it's a tough one, but the battery disconnect should be located on both sides of the wall, and also the short end of the battery should be against the wall for the most cost-effective layout. So we're going to talk about array layouts. Didn't quite get there, but we talk about the various downsides, and the answer is the short end of the battery should be against the wall so that you can access it on all sides. You paint the metal inside a battery room to prevent corrosion. And I think that's it.